Okay, perfect. So welcome once again. My name is Miriam. I'm currently a PhD student in environmental science, and here with me today is Shanira, who is currently doing her master's in law. And today we're facilitating this workshop for you on how to lead effective discussions online. So before we get started, can everyone type in what field or what program you're in? History, biology, social science. Very nice. So we have people coming from a large background. That's pretty cool. So hopefully you find this workshop today beneficial. The good thing about discussions is that there are principles that you use for discussions that can be applied to any field. So just gonna jump right in. Okay. So before we go further into the presentation today, I just have a bit of a poll for you, okay? Just to see where everyone is at. So send out the first question for you. Have you ever been a GA for an online course? Okay, so most of you guys are saying no. This is the first time you're GAing something online. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Okay, second question. Have you ever led a discussion at all? Some of you have. Some of you haven't. Okay, so I guess that's half-half. All right. And then third question, or last question, have you ever led a discussion online? No, so this is going to be new for you. Okay. All right, well, it looks like we all have a lot to learn, and it's great that you guys are joining us here today to help lead discussions even further. So a good discussion increases the dimensions of everyone who takes part. This is a famous quote by Randall Bourne, and with this quote in mind, I wanted to ask you a question. Oh, the audio is a bit fuzzy. Perhaps if anybody else has their microphone on, they could turn it off. Let's see. Okay. It's my speakers. Okay, I'll try moving this a bit. Maybe I'll lower my volume, and hopefully I'll at least be audible. It sounds okay? Okay, sounds good. So, big improvement. Okay, good. Okay, so a lot of you have perhaps already received what courses you're going to be GAing for, and if not, you're going to be receiving that very soon. And so you'll be getting the syllabus from your professor and the plan for the semester, and you'll see that your professor has assigned you to lead some discussions. What's the point of having this discussion in your course in the first place? Why is your professor having you lead discussions in the class? What's the point of this? We're going to shift away from the slides and do a whiteboard activity. So here's the whiteboard. I'm going to type the question down here. What's the point of having discussions in your course? And what I want you to do is, somewhere along the top of the screen, there should be an option button with the word T on it. So click that button and then click on the screen, write down your response, and press enter as soon as you're done. Okay, so we're getting some answers. Allow students to interact with subject matter, peer learning, collective learning, facilitate student involvement and opinions, elaborate on course content, make students active learners. Yeah, these are really great responses. All right, a few more coming in. Okay, sounds good. Well, you guys are actually on the right track. So I'll just pull up my slides once again. All right, okay. So while lectures are useful for transmitting information and teaching students knowledge, discussions take it a step further. So what they do is they take the knowledge that the students have learned in their classes, and whether that's in the classes that they're currently studying in or classes from previous semesters, and they take that knowledge and they're applying it in class through these discussions. So it helps them think outside the box and develop their critical thinking skills. It's important to note that while we're living in the COVID world today and everything is online in terms of classes, there are two different kinds of discussions that we can have in our online courses. So there are the synchronous discussions. Those are the ones that take place live. They take place in real time. So an example of this is being in a workshop like what we're in right now. If we all had our cameras on and we were discussing, that would be taking place in real time. You don't necessarily have to have your cameras on. You don't even have to have your microphone on. You might just be messaging. But the point is, all of us are there together at the same place. Same place and same time, same chat room and same time. And on the other hand, with asynchronous discussions, you have more flexibility in time. So you don't have to be in the chat room or on the discussion board at the same time your peers are there, or at the same time your students are there. And so we're gonna, the good thing is that the principles behind discussions can apply to both synchronous and asynchronous forms of discussion, but we will provide certain tips throughout the presentation that might be more useful for synchronous or asynchronous. So if you're leading discussion boards or if you're leading discussions online in class, you should be able to learn something positive from this workshop. And that leads me to the objectives of our workshop today. So there are four main sections. The first section deals with developing a positive environment that will encourage discussions that to take place. So we're going to be explaining and implementing strategies for developing a positive learning environment. Secondly, we'll be moving on to group dynamics, and so we'll explain the significance of group dynamics and the behavioral changes that help maintain group dynamics. Then we'll look at conflict, so that we could articulate and apply conflict resolution strategies after that presentation. And then we'll be talking about communicating effectively, and this consists of learning how to formulate effective questions, identifying characteristics of good active listening, and understanding the importance of feedback and how to construct effective feedback.
So as Miriam explained, we'll be looking at 4 segments in today's workshop, starting with developing a positive environment for online discussions. Developing this type of environment is key to having a successful discussion, especially in the online format. But we're going to start by posing a question. What is a positive environment? Well, we see the word positive, so we know it's good, but what does that environment look like? What are the characteristics that define that environment? So I want us to type our answers into the chat. If you think about a positive environment, what are the words that come to your mind? Just type it in the chat. Non-judgmental, engaging. Engaging in what way? Sense of belonging. Absolutely, students are safe to contribute. They feel safe. Respectfulness, great points. And they are open. Right. Okay, so I want to thank you for participating. I want to say that you are all on the right track, and we'll go further to explore what a positive environment is. So a positive environment is the environment that is conducive to learning. And it can also be referred to as an atmosphere, so positive atmosphere. It's conducive to learning, which means it provides the conditions that facilitate learning. It's also an environment where students feel comfortable with each other. So that ties in with some of the answers that you provided. They are not just comfortable with each other, they are also comfortable with the instructor or the graduate or teaching assistant in this case. So what are the characteristics of this environment? In this environment, students are actively engaged with one another and also with the materials and with the assistant, like I said. This environment also provides an atmosphere where students have respect for one another. They give respect and they receive respect in return. And in this atmosphere or environment, students come excited to learn. They're enthusiastic. They're not just there because they signed up for the course, but they are there because they want to learn. They are open to new ideas and to new challenges. And also in this environment, diversity and inclusivity is not just acknowledged, but is affirmed. And we know how diverse the current classrooms are. And coming to this environment, everyone's opinions, everyone's ideas, everyone's comments are valued and welcome. And this environment is not just key to engagement and deep learning. Remember, discussions should inspire deep learning. Students should be able to engage. They're not like lectures that students are passive learners. In discussions, students are active learners because they engage. So a positive environment ensures that this happens. But it's not just that. A positive environment alleviates some fears that instructors or assistants have about discussions. Now, most people don't like to use discussions because they don't want to lose that control, right? And also they fear that it might fail. The students might not participate. People might not want to talk, But when a positive environment is developed, then these fears are generally allayed. And I want you to know that we're talking about development. We're not saying that it's just creating the environment, because you don't just create it at the start of the discussions, you sustain it till the end. Also important to note is the fact that developing a positive environment for discussions is not the sole responsibility of the graduate assistant or the teaching assistant. The students also have a role to play. So it's a collaborative effort. So don't think that it's just your responsibility to, create this ideal environment that can facilitate engagement and can inspire deep learning. The students also have a role to play. And we'll talk about that later as we progress in the workshop. So how do you develop this positive environment? What are the practices that you engage in? What are the strategies that you can use to develop a positive environment? So this process starts way before the discussions take place. So for instance, in a few days, the university classes are going to start. And no thanks to COVID, all classes are going to be online. So this is the right time to start developing that positive environment. You be sure to reach out to your students. Introduce yourself. You can send an email or you can post the introduction on Blackboard or discussion board on Blackboard. Introduce yourself as the TA or the GA for the course, and you can provide such information as your office hours and the response times. You can also use this opportunity to welcome the students and reiterate your commitment to working with them throughout the course. Find out about their backgrounds and their experiences, so you can use questions to do that. Knowing about the backgrounds and experiences of students is important, especially when you're planning for the discussions, because sometimes the strategies you're going to use, the questions you're going to use will, think about these different backgrounds, because not everyone has the same experience, not everyone has the same background, and they're all going to be involved in the discussion. So acknowledging all their backgrounds is very important in planning for the discussions. And how best do you want to find out about these backgrounds than by asking them before the sessions begin? So this gives the students the impression that the GA or the TA really cares about their participation in the class, rather than wondering, about whether their voices or their, their perspectives or their individual experiences will be acknowledged or even affirmed in the discussions. And another thing you can do is to plan and prepare. I cannot overemphasize this point. You have to plan and prepare for the discussions ahead of time. During the discussions is not the time to start making important decisions. Before the discussions is the time. One of the things you can do is to set clear goals and have specific plans for the discussions. You can ask yourself such questions as what do I want to achieve by the discussions? What are the discussion outcomes? And how do I want to achieve them? What are the strategies that I'm going to use? And you can use such strategies as small discussions, questions, think, pair, share strategy. So there are so many strategies that you can use, but this is the time to start thinking about them and putting them into concrete plans, so that by the time the discussions start, you're ready to go. Set up practice online sessions. This is very important, especially at this time when all classes are going to be online. For some of us, including myself, who are not tech savvy, this will be a very important step in developing this positive environment. You can set up the practice sessions where the student can go in and practice, so that by the time they are coming for the discussions, they are well prepared. They are at that comfort level where they feel confident and they feel competent, to even participate in the online sessions. Provide the discussion materials in advance. You don't want to come to the discussion or to the class unprepared. Neither do you want the students to come in that way. So providing the materials in advance helps everyone to come to the discussion prepared. Now, when the discussion starts proper, especially the first class, this is the time to familiarize your students with each other and with the topic of discussion. You don't want them, coming to discussion and they're wondering what the concepts mean, what the ideas mean. So you want to be able to familiarize them with the topics of discussion, and most importantly, with each other. Remember, we talked about a positive environment being an environment where the students come in and they feel comfortable to engage. They are open to ideas, and they have to start this process when they, interact with each other. So you can use icebreakers. Icebreakers are activities that you can use to get the students to start talking to each other. And so you can ask them to introduce themselves. You can ask them why, for instance, they chose the course, apart from the fact that it's a required course. Why do you choose to be part of this discussion or to be part? So these kind of questions can get them talking and getting to know each other. Another way you can do this is to use small groups. We know that some students are shy by nature and they may not want to participate, move directly or dive directly into large group discussions. And so that's why I talked about the think, pair, share. So they think by themselves and they go into a group of two where they pair with a fellow student, and then they can, talk about discuss the point before they share it in plenary session. So this is a great way to get the students to start discussing in small groups before they move into larger groups, making them comfortable. This is the next point is very important, explaining the need for discussions. You need to justify to the students. We all know that for a long time, the primary way that learning has occurred is through lectures. So most students are comfortable with being passive learners and they don't want to change. They are used to their previous behavior. So if you want to get the students going with the discussion, you have to justify the need. You have to explain to them the importance. And Miriam did explain to us at the beginning the importance of discussion. So this is a conversation you need to have with your students during the first class. Then involve the students in creating a set of norms. We call them ground rules that will guide the discussions. Now, in some courses, the instructors have already in their syllabus put out the ground rules or the norms for class interaction, the behaviors that are expected of the students. So if it's the case in your course that this has happened, then you may not need to duplicate another set of norms. But if you have the permission of your instructor to go ahead and develop these norms, then this might be a great time to involve the students. Remember what I said earlier, that developing this environment is not your sole responsibility. You have to involve the students. When the students are involved, there's a sense of ownership. It's more likely that they will adhere to these norms, and then of course be more engaged, participate, and then the discussion will go on and inspire learning and achieve its outcomes. During the discussions, it's also helpful to use concrete examples or visual aids to help the students understand the concepts. Now, the concepts and the ideas, they form the foundation for discussions. You cannot just jump into or dive into discussions without explaining the concepts or the ideas that form the basis for that discussion. So for instance, I have an image up on the slide, as you can see. So if, for instance, you're a GA or a TA in the Faculty of Law and you're facilitating a discussion about the judicial structure of criminal courts in, say, for instance, the province of Ontario. So whilst you might be having a lecture about it, you can also show a slide like this, especially for visual learners. This will make the concept clearer to them. So when they look at this image, it's easy for them to see how the courts are structured. And that would help them when they go into discussions proper, because they have this right they've envisioned it, they've seen the image, and so they can move on with the discussions. Be present during the discussions. Check in regularly. If you're having the discussion in a discussion board, for instance, on Blackboard, do check in to see how the students are progressing with the discussions. If it's happening live, you have to check in and ask them. If it's happening in small groups, you can get into those groups, and we're going to do an activity where we can show you how you can break up the discussion into small groups and how you can get into those groups so that you can check in on the students. You can do this by offering ideas and resources. Sometimes the students are stuck and the discussion is being stalled, so you can offer them resources, extra resources that can jumpstart the discussion. You can also stimulate debate by asking questions. So you can, for instance, say, "Oh, Isaac, you make such a great point, but why do you think that?" For instance, if they provide a comment, you can ask them, "Why do you think so?" Just by providing that question, that inspires further discussion. So you don't want the discussions getting stalled or being derailed, which is what you don't want to happen. Encourage student-to-student interaction. This is so important because students are used to commenting back at the instructor or at the graduate assistant. At this time, if a student posts a comment to you, you can redirect that to a fellow student, because the essence of having discussions is that the students are interacting with themselves. Your role in discussion is to be a facilitator. Your role is to guide the discussion and not to be so much an integral part of the discussion. So you should be able to do this. Finally, you have to take the students seriously. Acknowledge and appreciate their contributions. Don't take it for granted that they should know and they should participate. If someone makes a great comment on Blackboard, for instance, you can, acknowledge that it's a great comment, Isaac. And then if you want to ask further questions, then you can go ahead. But it's important to appreciate their contributions. Attend to their concerns. For instance, if you're having a live session, some student might not participate because they are, struggling with the tech. If you notice this, then that's the time to go in and provide the help that they need. Or some students might not be participating because they're having personal concerns. You can address that if you can, but if you cannot, then you can always reach out to the instructor. But the key here is to let the students know that you're in the process of this learning, that you're in the learning process with them. Remember the commitment you made to them in the first email you sent to them, that you're with them on this journey and that you're there to provide them with the help you need. This is the time to make good on that promise. Finally, model the behaviors and attitudes you expect of the students. Remember, I talked about creating a positive environment in collaboration with the students. So you come up with a set of norms, a set of ground rules, expected behaviors that will guide the discussions. The important thing here is that the students should see you modeling that behavior. So in terms of online etiquette, being positive, using appropriate language, not using all caps. If you're posting on a discussion board, the students will want to see you modeling this behavior. When you do this, the students will respect you. Remember, I talked about giving respect and receiving respect. Then it's more likely that the students will continue in this wise. So what I've done so far is to provide some tips, some best practices in terms of developing a positive environment. You can develop all the strategies that are good to facilitate an online discussion, but I tell you that if there's no positive environment that discussion can take place, then there will be no participation, no engagement, and most likely no learning will take place.
So now that we've learned how to have the right positive environment before we start our discussions, we're going to go into maintaining group dynamics throughout our discussions in the semester. So group dynamics refer to the interactions that take place within a group. It looks at how the group develops, how stable a group is, how motivated a group is, and how people develop, how stable the development is, or how they are throughout the semester, and how their motivation is as well. So a lot of it has to do with interactions within group members. I want you to answer this question in the chat. Why is it important to maintain group dynamics? Why do you think that's important, to maintain the interactions at a certain level in a certain way? Good learning environment? Good. It keeps people motivated. Momentum. Encourage connection. That's right. Learn from each other. Can lead to that positive environment. Very good. These are all really good responses. Yeah, so the reason why we want to make sure that we're maintaining the group dynamics after we've set up that positive environment is because it adds stability to the group. It helps move the discussions forward. Yeah, it helps maintain an atmosphere where people are willing to share. That's right. It allows for students to improve their communication skills. So you're giving them a safe space where they can practice talking about their field, about certain topics and arguments in their field, which is something that a lot of students don't really have an opportunity to do outside of school. And it allows for students to improve their group working skills because with group dynamics, later Shania is going to be talking about conflict, but you'll see that with group dynamics, when you have a discussion, things might not always, you might have some ups and downs, and that's okay. So by having your students watch you navigate these discussions, perhaps navigating students who might be over speaking or over talking other students, watching you help out students who are more shy and quiet can give them something for them to learn from, and this can help them in the future with their group working skills in in this course and in future courses and in life in general. So there are a lot of benefits to maintaining group dynamics, and what you'll find is, a lot of you said, about half of you said that you haven't led a discussion before. So I'm guessing a lot of you are going to be assigned to teach undergraduate classes, and you'll find that in a lot of undergraduate classes, especially if you're more studying in the sciences, you'll find that a lot of students have never actually been part of a discussion before. So discussions are totally new to them. And to take that a step further, with everything being online now, you'll find that most, if not all, the students in your class may have never participated in a discussion online. So this is going to be a new environment, a new experience for them. So it's important to keep in mind that when you're having your discussions, you may notice that at times some of your students might not be exhibiting the best behavior. And because this is their first time in a discussion like this, they might not actually know that they're doing that behavior. So the first step is to bring awareness to that negative behavior. So if a student cuts someone else off, for example, over and over again, or if they're on the screen and they look like they're not paying attention and they're not focused, those are examples of negative behaviors. And so there are multiple ways you can do this. One way you can do this is that you can just address the class as a whole and remind people of what the norms are of the discussions, how people should behave in front of each other. Don't point a single person out. You're just reminding people what the general rules are. Another way you can do this is contact the student individually. You can do this by asking them to meet with you for office hours, or you can do this through email. But remember that in each of the cases, remember not to pick on the student. Like you don't want them to take this personally. You're not attacking them as a person. You're just pointing out certain behaviors, certain actions that are taking place that need improvement. And you just want to make them aware of these negative behaviors so that they can turn into positive behavior, and that leads to our next step. So perhaps by saying, instead of if a student, for example, is cutting other people off without knowing, you could tell them to allow them to give the opportunity for other students to finish their thoughts before raising your hand. Just raise your hand and then we'll pick on you and then you'll be able to share. So transforming the negative behavior that they've done to a positive one. And you can even take that a step further with this example. And if you really want to make it a positive behavior, you could have them learn to acknowledge the opinions and thoughts of their peers. So they perhaps wait until their peers share their idea. And then when they're about to share their idea, they can say, oh, well, thank you, Jessica, for that thought. I never really thought about this problem this way. Here's what I think. And that really helps the student transform as a person in a discussion, because when you're teaching them how to do well in these discussions, you're also preparing them for the discussions that they're going to be part of in the future. And so with time, what you'll see that is that they're going to be practicing these positive behaviors so much that these positive behaviors are just going to become a habit. It's just going to come natural to them. So those are the steps of the behavioral change in discussions. There are a few issues at times that take place in discussions with respect to students dominating discussions or students not participating through discussions. So we're going to share a few tips with those. If you're in a situation where you have a student dominating a conversation, which often happens, sometimes you'll get a student who's just super excited and just really enjoys being part of big discussions or really enjoys a certain topic, and you don't want to crush them, right? You don't want to feel like you've heard enough from them, but at the same time you want to give everyone an equal opportunity in the class to participate, because sometimes if you have one person who's talking over and over and over again, someone else in the class might not feel as inclined to participate. So what you can do in this case is you can ask a student for comments. So of course you don't want to be doing this in a way where you're picking on someone, right? So for example, you could say something like, "Oh, Jacob, that's a really good point. How about you, Shanira? What do you think about this topic? How would you act in this situation?" And so you're transitioning very nicely. You're not pushing anybody away, and at the same time you're allowing other people to take part in the conversation. Another way you can do this is instead of just directly asking another student for a comment, you could just reword or redirect the topic to allow more comments. So you just want to change the question up a bit, because sometimes you won't get students participating in a class. Sometimes you only get one or two people participating over and over and over again, just because the rest of the students don't really know how to answer that question. So you just want to make a few alterations to the question to make it perhaps a bit easier. Like, for example, you could say something like, how, if it was a class about, I don't know, chocolate milk, we'll say, and you've asked them how the consumption of chocolate milk has changed during World War II, and you find that only two people are participating over and over again, maybe you can shift it a bit and say, well, how does the consumption of chocolate milk look like today? So that question is a bit more relatable. The students live in today's world, right? So it might make it a bit easier for students to answer the question. What to do if a student is not participating? So if you get a student who is rarely participating or not participating at all, the reason why they might not be participating might not necessarily mean that they're not interested or that they don't care. Sometimes students don't participate because they're shy, they're nervous, they might think that their opinions and their thoughts are not good enough. They might be overthinking the points that they went to the class, so there might be low self-confidence there. So to break the ice, what you might want to do is to switch over to an opinion question. So with the chocolate milk example, perhaps take a step back if you'd like, and you could say, okay, well, what kind of milk do you guys prefer? Which kind of milk do you think is best? Chocolate, regular, or strawberry flavored milk? There's no right or wrong answer to this question. It's just an opinion question, so it's easy for everyone to answer. You could also break up into smaller groups to make students more comfortable with each other and allow more room for participation. You might think that this is something that can only be done in class. This is something you can actually do on Blackboard now. And Shanira is going to be walking us through a case study later today where we're using a special feature called breakout rooms. So essentially what happens is, there are like around 115 people in this room right now, right? But if we want to break up into smaller discussions, we can break you up into smaller groups of 3, of 4, of how many people that we want, where you go into your smaller groups, you can discuss the question together, and then later on go back to the bigger group and share what your group has talked over. And by breaking up into smaller groups, you're allowing these shyer and quieter students to build a relationship with their peers, to just be more comfortable in the classroom as a whole, in addition to allowing them more room for participation. You can also do this online by breaking people up into smaller groups for discussion boards. There are ways for you to break up the class so that they're not all on one board. You can actually group students into different groups. You can ask for written answers, and this is to build a relationship between you and the student. So you might be able to ask a discussion question that they could take home, or that they can answer through email or whatever other platform you want to use. And when the student is formulating this response to you, they have in mind, they know that you're going to be reading this, and they know that you're going to know what their thoughts are. So this can help break the ice between you and that student. So we're just going to take a bit of a break right now to see if you guys have any questions at all on anything we discussed. So you can ask any questions about managing group dynamics or about the presentation that Shanira gave on the positive environment and discussions. If you have any questions, feel free to write them down in the chat before we move on to the last 2 sections. So let's see. If there aren't any questions, we might just move on then, and we'll provide another opportunity for you to ask questions at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to be doing a group session working on students' creative work. Very nice. Good. Yeah, there is a recording for this lecture. So sensitive as in, you know what? We're going to be talking about giving feedback at the second half of the presentation. So how about we go through that part first and see if the tips that we provide there are going to help you with working on the students' creative work, okay? Okay, great.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. So we're gonna go on with the third aspect of managing or leading effective online discussions, and talk about conflict. So conflict is bound to happen wherever you have 2 or more people interacting. The likelihood of conflict coming up is high. So for those of us who don't like to talk about conflict or who want to avoid conflict, you cannot avoid it in online discussions because it's bound to happen. So we might as well address it. So I want to start by asking the question, what is conflict? When you see this question, what is conflict? What is the first word that comes to your mind? And so we're going to have I'm going to share the whiteboard, and I want you, like you did in previous discussion with Miriam, to type on the whiteboard. You see the icons there, and you click on the T, and then you type in the first word, disagreements, argument, negative, okay, dispute, rude, different ideas, power struggle. There's a theme that is forming from all the answers that are coming up: differences of opinion, rude, racist comments, disrespect. Okay. Power struggle. Great. Great answers. Okay, so what is conflict? So I go back to share my files. Okay. Sorry about that. So what is conflict? So in providing a definition for conflict, I want to say that most of you were correct in the answers that you provided, that conflict is a disagreement or opposition, and this might arise because of differences or perceived differences in interests, in the ideas that people have, in their goals that they want to achieve, or in their values. So there is a theme. When you were providing answers to the question of what is conflict, there was a theme in your answers, and that is it's negative. Conflict is a disagreement, it's a power struggle, it's racist comments, it's opposition. So these speak to the negativity, the inherent negativity of conflict. So even the definition, even the very word itself, when you look at the word conflict, the first three letters is C-O-N, con, and con means against. So it looks as if conflict is a bad thing. And if something is bad, you don't want to engage in it, right? But I have already said that conflict is a part of everyday interaction. It happens everywhere, including in a discussion online. So if it's going to happen in your class that you're facilitating, a discussion that you're facilitating, then we might as well deal with it. But I just want to say that conflict is not necessarily negative. There can be useful, yeah, it can be positive. Absolutely. I agree with you on that. And I was just going to make that point that conflict can serve useful purposes. Because when you engage in conflict, you get you are open to new ideas from the person that you're involved in the conflict with. You learn new skills. You learn how to communicate effectively. You learn how to listen to people that if you did not engage in the conflict, you probably wouldn't have learned. And conflict leads to growth in the group, in the group or in a team, such as a discussion team or a discussion group. So there are benefits that can accrue from conflict. So it's not necessarily, a bad thing. So you can't, as a graduate assistant or a teaching assistant, and you've been assigned in this course, and you're going to have a series of discussions, or the course itself is discussion based, and you're like, oh my God, what if conflict comes up? What am I going to do about it? I don't want to engage in the conflict. The truth is, you want to be able to engage in the conflict, because when conflict is addressed in a constructive way, then it's a good thing. And so what we're going to do is to show you strategies that you can use to address the conflicts that will likely come up in the online discussions that you facilitate. First, we want to discuss the various types of conflicts that can arise, especially in an online discussion. Now, this can arise even in class, but since we're focusing on online discussions, we're just going to talk about it. The first is the task conflict. So what is this task conflict? Is disagreements that arise from differences in ideas or views about tasks, or even how to go about it. So for instance, if you assign a group of students that they should go to the library and read up some journal articles and come up with a report for the next class, the students might have a conflict as to what you mean, or what the task involves, or even how to go about it. So that's a task conflict there. And you might have a relationship conflict. This arises from individual differences. Some people are shy and reserved, and some people are the opposite. Some people like to do things one way, and the others might take a different route. And you're having a discussion, bringing these different personalities together. Remember when I started, I talked about knowing the the different backgrounds, the different experiences that the students bring to the discussion. Now, these different backgrounds, we know that it can provide diversity, it can provide interesting ideas, bring interesting ideas to the discussion, but it can also be a source of conflict. So as a graduate assistant, as a teaching assistant that is going to be facilitating these online discussions, you need to know that disagreements or opposition or struggles can arise just because people are differently made. People come in different ways. And also you have value conflicts. These conflicts arise out of different identities, how people see themselves and how they want to be seen and how they want to be represented, as well as their beliefs and their values. These conflicts usually arise or typically arise where you have controversial topics. For instance, if you're facilitating an online discussion about politics, you can imagine what kind of ideas that will come up, or religion. So these are the types of topics that can, and of course, depending on the discipline that you come from, you may have some topics that are peculiar to that discipline that will typically bring up conflict of beliefs or values, where people just dig into their what they believe in and will not shift ground. So you should be aware of this kind of conflicts, because knowing what type of conflict is arising at any particular time during the online discussion will help you to know what type of strategy to apply. Now, it's one thing to know about conflict, but it's another thing to know how to intervene in a constructive way, because the goal, the essence of this work is to provide tips, provide strategies that you can use to resolve these conflicts when they come up. And I must pause here to say that sometimes you may have specific instructions from your instructor as how to intervene or not to intervene in a conflict. So we would advise that you follow whatever advice that the instructor has provided for you. What the tips we're providing today is in the event that you've been giving the permission to intervene in a conflict or to address a conflict that arises. So you take note of that. So knowing how to resolve a conflict, it's important to understand the retaliation circle. So the retaliation circle is important because this shows us how a conflict can escalate and how you can de-escalate a conflict. So I just want to take some time to explain this. So the first part of this circle is when an event happens. So when someone gets angry, for instance, or when someone posts a comment that is deemed disrespectful. The second part of it is how the person that the comment is directed at, or how the person that sees the post on the discussion board reacts. So how do you respond to that event? Do you respond in like manner? So if someone posts an angry, disrespectful comment on the discussion board, how is the response? So it's important to know that if someone doesn't step out of this circle to take a pause and not respond in the same way, that this circle will run its full life and in so many ways until one person decides not to respond in an angry way and de-escalates. Because when conflict happens in a session, your intention or your goal as a graduate assistant or a teaching assistant is to de-escalate the conflict, is to put an end, to manage it. Because if that does not happen, then the discussion is going to be derailed. The discussion is not going to achieve its intended outcome. And I'm sure that's not what you want as a graduate assistant. So it's important to understand the retaliation circle. So what are some of the strategies that you can use when a conflict arises in your discussion session? The first thing is not to ignore the conflict. I know that's what some of us will want to do. We want to pretend, or not pretend, but want to, wish the conflict away. We don't want to participate. We don't want to engage in the conflict. But I tell you, the first thing you want to do is not to ignore the conflict. You have to engage. So if someone posts an angry comment, for instance, or a disrespectful comment on the discussion board, you have to address that. You cannot wish it away or pretend that it's not there. If you're having a live session and someone is being disruptive, it has to be addressed. You cannot just allow it to escalate. Remember what I talked about, the retaliation cycle. We don't want that cycle to run its full course. We want to break it at some point, and that's when how you respond to the conflict. Now, when you respond to the conflict, the way that you respond to it is also very important. Like I said, in the retaliation cycle, you do not respond in the same manner. Looking at it. So if the first event, someone says something angry or someone is being disruptive, you do not respond in anger. You do not respond in anger. You have to be calm as you respond. You want to listen to the person to understand what the real problem is. In conflict resolution circles, we have a saying that the problem is not the person. The problem is the issue. So if someone is angry, the problem is not the angry person. There might be an underlying thing that is going on that is making the person angry. It might just be that the person woke up to some horrible news and brings it to the class, to the discussion, and is acting it out. And so that's why you don't want to respond in like manner. That's why you want to be calm and call attention to what's going on with the person and listen to understand what the real issue is. Now, when you've had that conversation and you've heard what the person has said, then you summarize what the person has said to clarify your understanding. And you can do this by repeating back to the person what the person has said. So you can say such things as, if I understand what you're saying, and then you can respond to the person. And if the person acknowledges that that's what they have said, then the next step is that you can apologize if that is appropriate. Apology is not appropriate in all circumstances, but in trying to de-escalate the conflict, you may need to offer an apology. You can say things like, I'm sorry that you feel this way, but I'm sorry that this has come to this point, but this is what I'm going to do. And that leads us to the next step of generating options for resolution. So you put a plan in motion on how you're going to do, or what you're going to do, what plans you're going to use, what strategies you're going to use to resolve the conflict. So for instance, if a student is angry about the grades that they have received, you can say to them that you will then consult with the instructor to find out what can be done about the grades. So that's an action plan that you've put in place. But I must pause here to state that sometimes the conflict it escalates to a point that is beyond the graduate assistant or the teaching assistant to intervene. At such instances, you may have to consult with your instructor to find out the way forward. So it's not all conflicts that you can intervene. You have to escalate it to the instructor for further directives at what to do. So, like I said, these are some of the general strategies that you can use to resolve a conflict that arises, whether it's a value conflict, is a relationship conflict, is a task conflict. You can implement these strategies. These are general strategies and by no means exhaustive. So if we're talking about strategies that you can use to resolve conflict, I mean, it will take a whole day workshop to do that, but these strategies will work in most conflicts that will arise in an online discussion. So we're gonna participate in a case study. What we're going to do is that we're going to look at this case study, and then we're going to answer the question that follows: how would you handle this conflict situation? So we're going to we're going to have a breakout group where we're going to put everyone in a randomly selected group. And so the instructions when you get to the group is to read the case study and answer the question, like I said, that follows through it. You can have a discussion in your group. You can, if you want to speak, you can turn on your mic when you want to speak, and you can turn on your camera so that you can see one another in those groups. So this is put into practice what we have talked about, having small groups and then coming back in plenary to discuss what the options that we generated in our small groups. So after the small group discussions, which is going to take about 7 minutes, we're going to bring you back to plenary session so that we can debrief and then go on from there. So we're just going to go ahead and do the breakout groups. So
Yeah, and also,
go ahead.
sorry, Tamira.
Go ahead.
We just wanted to let you know that also, if you'd like, you'll still have access to see the. So I posted for you what the case study question is, and when you go into your breakout groups, if you go and check on the chat option, you should be able to see the everyone chat and the chat that's just for your group. So if you want to visit what the case study is again, you can go back and click on the everyone group chat, and you should be able to see this case study, okay?
And don't worry too much. The moderators are going to be coming into the groups to address any questions you have, your concerns, and ask how you're doing when we send you to those small groups. Okay. So we're going to start right now.
Okay. Okay, so how do you want to split this up? How many groups do we have?
We have 10 groups.
Okay. So how about maybe you go from 1 to 5 and I do, wait, is that 1 to 4 and I do, well, you do the first half, I do the second half?
Yeah, it's Laura. Laura, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, can you help us with so I'm going to go to group 1 and group 1 to 4, and Miriam is going to go to 5 to 8, and then you can go to 9, 10.
Sure. I think when you're making your breakout rooms, I don't know that, are you assigning the moderators to groups? Because we need to make sure we can move back and forth.
And that's what I just said.
Yeah, that's what but there's a button to select. That's what I was saying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
we're moderators.
I'm gonna go to groups 1 to 5. So I'll
Yeah.
go to 1. Yeah.
No, I understand that, but you need to make sure when you're setting up the breakout rooms that you don't force the moderators into the group so that they can't leave the group to go check on the other ones. That's what I'm saying.
No. We're all in the main group. I don't think I'm forcing. We're all in one group. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we practiced it yesterday. I think we should be good.
Okay.
Okay, so we're all back to the main room. So how is everyone doing?
That was
Okay, I hope we all had the chance to participate in the small group discussions that we had about the case study. And like I said, we're going to come back to plenary and have a discussion about the case study. So I just want to call on one or two groups that are comfortable with sharing what they thought about the case study and what's the best way to handle this conflict situation that arose in this online discussion session. So do we have any group that's willing to share? You can turn on your microphone. You can use the raise hand function if you wanted to share.
I think I will start by trying to tell the student that that was not my intent to misjudge her comment, to create a conducive environment for us to have a dialogue.
Okay.
And then I will go further to try to represent my assessment, what I said. More probably she didn't get what I said clearly. And then I could ask her if that makes any difference. And if it doesn't, then I will probably ask her to make her comment again so that I may understand better and then try to provide an answer. And if that doesn't work, then I may have to take the case to the instructor.
Okay. Great point. So how are you going to reach the student?
How am I going to reach the student?
Yes.
I think we could do that through email.
Okay. So you're going to send an email to the
Yes.
student.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. 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 Great point. Great point you make there. Thank you. Can anyone else from another group share what they came up with as to how to intervene in this conflict situation? Yes, go ahead, Linda. Linda, you wanted to say something? Okay, so just moving on because of our time, I think from what we learned earlier on about the retaliation circle, it's important that the graduate assistant not respond in kind to the posting or the comment posted by the student. The best thing is to reach the student by email, as the last speaker said, in order to address the issue, like I said. But because I don't know if anyone caught this, the fact that this happened in a discussion board, which means that the whole discussion class or the whole class was privy to the post from the student. So in that case, I think the graduate assistant should also respond to that comment in the discussion board, not singling out the student, but referring the class to the norms and expectations that they had created before the discussion. So in this way, you're not calling out the student, but you're telling the student that the comment that was posted on the discussion board does not meet with the standard that was set for the discussion. So invariably or indirectly, you're telling the student that those comments were unacceptable without calling them out, because you don't want to shut the student out from further interaction in the discussions. So I just wanted to pose a general question and ask, so did anything surprise you from the discussions that you had, thinking about the way that you would have handled this situation before this workshop, and from the tips and strategies that were provided, did you see the conflict differently from the way you saw it before now?
See, please, I I have a question or a comment.
Yeah.
I'm an instructor, and from my experience over the years, you find that, I'm sorry to say, there are students who feel very privileged. And if they have a GA or a TA, they think it's not as privileged as themselves. Then they seem to put up this attitude and this, I would say, arrogance in talking to them and in talking to their instructors, I'm sorry to say, who are racialized minorities. So when it gets to that point, at times I particularly tend to if this student is fond of behaving this way consistently, always misjudging, feeling that she's being misjudged, feeling that she has the answer, she knows it all. I think it gets to a point where you have to just tell the student to please excuse me. I'm sorry. I at times have to tell the student, you need to unpack your privilege in order to be able to understand what other people are saying and to get their perspective.
Absolutely. I think the point we want to make here is that it's important to engage and to engage in a constructive way. So sometimes you may have to address the conflict outside of the class, but what we try to talk about here is where a conflict is happening live or in a discussion board in a session that is facilitated maybe by a teaching assistant. But even when it's an instructor that is facilitating or leading the discussion, sometimes the conflict would have to be addressed beyond even the instructor, going up to the office of the ombudsman or the legal department in the university, depending on how far the conflict have gone. So thank you everyone for participating in this case study. We'll proceed further in the discussion. Turn it over now to Miriam.
All right. Thank you, Shanira. So keep in mind that if you did ask a question in the chat, we're going to be able to address it right after we finish this last section, which is on communicating effectively. I know time is ticking and it's almost 11:30, but we won't take too long. We're just going to be focusing on some key tips that may be useful for you for communicating effectively. And there are 3 sections to this. The first section is to ask effective questions because the way that we lead discussions, of course, is by asking questions, right? So when you're sitting down to prepare for your discussions, first of all, always make sure that you're prepared. Don't just walk into your discussions. You need to come up with questions that are focused on what the students are supposed to learn by the end of the course. So go back to your syllabus and look at your learning goals. Learn why you're holding the discussions in the first place. If anybody else has their microphone on, just make sure that you shut it off just so that my voice can project to everyone's speakers very well. But anyway, so yeah, look back at the learning goals. Know why you're asking the questions that you're going to ask. Remember what we talked about at the beginning of this presentation. The reason why we're having discussions is because we want to take that background knowledge that they learned in their classes, and we're providing them an opportunity for them to think outside the box, to develop critical thinking skills, to apply what they learn in new situations. So you want to focus on what the goal is of the course so that the students can get the marks that they deserve in the end, so that you're helping students excel not in this course but in their field as a whole. Always refer to those learning goals. And then when formulating the questions, keep in mind that there are different levels of questions. So a lower level of question would be something that's a lot more simple to answer, something perhaps more factual, like when was the French Revolution, for example. A higher level question is more complex, and it's more divergent, so it allows for a lot of different answers. There isn't really a right or wrong answer. You just have to make sure that you support whatever answer that you give. So a higher level question would be something sort of like, how did the French Revolution influence literature in 19th century Europe? Now, that's not to say that one type of question is better than the other. Of course, the higher level questions are going to push students to think a bit more, think about different possibilities, push those application skills. But lower level questions are also useful. So if you're teaching and you're leading a discussion and you're finding that a lot of people are not answering your questions, you're back at the case where you have only one or two students answering the question, maybe the question you're asking is a bit too complex. So take a step back and think of a lower level question that you can give. So with this same example, if I was in a poetry class and I started off my discussion by saying, how did the French Revolution influence literature in the 19th century Europe? And I find that nobody's answering me. I'll say, you know what? Okay, let's take it a step back. When was the French Revolution? Then I'll have someone answer me. Then I'll go, okay, so what kind of literary movement took place at this period of time? What kind of literature was around? What kind of poetry was around? What kind of theater was around? And we're building that background knowledge. We're reminding people, we're teaching students that background knowledge they need so that we can go back to that higher level question of how did the French Revolution influence 19th century Europe, and they have the information they need, so their brains are warmed up and they can say, oh, okay, I see what direction we're going in now, so this is what I think was the influence. I think that because this was going on at the time, literature changed in this way, and then they can go on and on and on. So with communicating effectively, we not only have to put together the right questions, but we also have to make sure that we're listening to each other properly. So here's a famous quote by Stephen Covey. The biggest communication problem is that we do not listen to understand. We listen to reply. And this leads us to active listening. Active listening requires work from everyone, because listening isn't just, hearing what the other person has to say. There's a whole path of communication there. So a person has to formulate their thoughts, they have to say them or type them, and then you have to listen to them or read them, and then you have to internalize it a bit. And as the person is communicating, they're watching you and seeing how you react to what they say. Are you listening? Are you paying attention? Do you give comments every now and then? Do you ask questions? So active listening actually takes work, and by continuing to improve your active listening skills, by showing that you're actively listening, you're allowing for more clarity to continue in the communication as a whole. So it's important to remember that communication is both verbal and non-verbal. So take note of how you present yourself on the screen. When you're leading a discussion, are you focused on the screen when your students are speaking, or does it look like you're looking around every once in a while? Does it look like you're distracted a bit? How is the computer projecting your voice? It might be worth checking every now and then on Blackboard or whatever platform you're using to make sure that the microphone is recording your voice at a high volume. So there are ways for you to check to see how well your microphone is working. And that way, if you're a bit too quiet, if you realize that, perhaps you're sitting a bit too far from your device, if your sound ends up being a bit too quiet, it might actually just come off as you sounding that like you're not interested or not excited. And so these are little things that can contribute to how active listening is in your discussion. What's your posture like? Does it look like you are sitting in bed, or does it look like you're actually sitting there ready for class? Do you look like you're rushing, or do you look fully engaged and enjoying the conversation? Active listening also applies to asynchronous communication. So this is the type of communication that can happen in discussion boards, for example. And a lot of this focuses on the way and the frequency and just the way that you write. So what's your punctuation and tone like? Do you sound monotone? Do you sound excited? Do you use a lot of exclamation marks? Do you use, the dot, dot, dot character? A lot of capitalization, all caps, lower caps. There's a time and place for each of those tools. Make sure you're using them correctly. How do you, or how often do you respond to the comments and questions of your students? Does it look like you are always excited and checking to see what your students are writing? Does it look like you're checking the board frequently? Or does it look like you just check it every Saturday night to see what's on there and comment on everything and go? When you comment, do you comment with very general comments? Are you just trying to get through the list? Or do you actually take the time to read what your students have to say and actually write a really thorough response? Now, you don't have to write paragraphs and paragraphs, but you want to show that you're actually interested in what they have to say and point out little things, little comments that they say, and continue on the conversation. Now, it's very easy for us to be distracted online with our emails buzzing, our phone messages going off, maybe family barging into the room while you're in a discussion online or whatnot. I know all of us here are students, so we all have our own classes to attend to. Many of us have research. You might be waiting for an email on that manuscript that you submitted to see if it got accepted. But by fully focusing on that 1 hour or however long you need on your students, you will have a richer discussion. And lastly, the last section for today, I know a lot of you guys have to go. We're just going to talk really quickly about feedback. So feedback is important because it helps us identify what students know, what they don't know, what's working in a discussion, and what isn't working. You get to understand if they have the background knowledge that they need to participate in discussions to their full potential, or if they need a little brushing up to do, if things are working out for them well in discussions, or if you need to tweak up the questions a bit to help move discussions forward. So feedback is important, and it's important to note that it's both negative and positive. Even though we tend to focus a lot on areas of weakness and how we can improve because we're always trying to better ourselves, it's also important to point out strengths, because by pointing out strengths, you're also saying, hey, this is something good that you're doing. Make sure you keep it up. Make sure you keep doing it. Don't lose sight of it. It also allows you to a way for you to motivate your students. Characteristics of good feedback includes focusing on the behavior and not the person. So this can get a little bit sensitive sometimes, but you want to make sure that you're not focusing on the person. You're focusing on certain actions or behaviors. So you're focusing on certain ways of formulating thoughts, for example. You're focusing on, clarity in voice. You're not saying that, you're a person who doesn't speak well. You're saying instead, a way for you to further improve your communication is by perhaps raising your voice or looking at a situation from this angle. So you're looking at the behavior and not the person. And make sure that when you give feedback, you're specific and descriptive. There's nothing more confusing than getting feedback that's super general, because it provides no direction and it's not helpful. It doesn't really show students what they need to work on or what they're doing well, or in what way they should be changing or going. Timeliness is also important. The sooner you give back the feedback, the more effective it is. The sooner they can apply it, the fresher it is in their minds. There's a difference between getting feedback in the same day and in the same week and in the same month, right? They're not the same. So the sooner the better. And always, as we referred to before, always look back at what the goal of the course is, what the learning goal is. What does your what does your professor want your students to know by the end of the course? Are they hitting that target? So what are some points we can look at when formulating feedback for a discussion? So if you're sitting in a discussion and you're evaluating your students, these are a few points you can look at to help you with evaluating their participation in feedback. So again, look at your learning goals and make sure they're hitting what your professor wants from them and what direction your professor wants you to go into. Look at the clarity and communication. Do they have clear arguments? Does it look like their arguments are easy to follow, or does it feel like you have to decode what they say? Are their ideas organized or disorganized? Are they demonstrating good background knowledge on the subject matter, or do they need to maybe take a step back and do a bit more readings or watch a few educational videos so that they can reach their full potential whenever they participate in discussion? How are they applying this background knowledge to their answers? So sometimes you'll actually see students who have all the background knowledge necessary. They know a lot. They just have a hard time pushing themselves to think outside the box and apply that knowledge to a new situation. What are their behaviors like with respect to their classmates? Do they interrupt their classmates? Are they acknowledging? So if a student brings up a few points, do they actually notice what what their peers are saying, or are they just focused on the question and what they want to say? Are they helpful? So if there's a student who's a bit more shy or not as confident, do you find that they try to help them a bit out, try to make them feel a bit more comfortable, or try to help them with formulating their responses? And essentially what you're looking for is changes that can help move the discussion forward. So with strengths, we mentioned earlier, they might already be doing things that are good, things that you want them to continue. Also look for things that you're just looking for, little tweaks that you want them to make to help them improve in discussions.
So to conclude, what we've tried to do during this discussion is to provide you with strategies and best practices to lead online discussions in an effective way. And we had talked about creating or developing a positive learning environment, what that environment looks like, and how you can create that environment, especially with in collaboration with the students. We try to also talk about the behavioral change that helps to maintain group dynamics, how the students interact during those online sessions, and talked also about the different types of conflicts that may arise in online discussions, and most importantly, how to address those conflicts. We did say that the list that we provided is by no means exhaustive, but we believe that if you apply those general conflict resolution strategies, that they might just help to de-escalate, which is what you want to do, especially in live online sessions. And also talked about how to formulate effective questions, because you can't really have a successful online session discussion if you don't have questions that inspire interaction. Then finally, we talked about the elements of good active listening and providing effective feedback. So we just want to thank each and every one of you for taking out time to attend our workshop. We're grateful for all the very important contributions that you made and your participation, especially in the small groups, and coming back to plenary with the ideas that you generated in those groups. So you are able to at least practice using small groups in online discussions and what it looks like migrating from small groups back to plenary to discuss. So we'll leave the floor open for questions. I know we're a bit over time, but I can see some questions already in the discussion chat, and we can be able to address some of them. Once again, we thank you so much. And there is a feedback link that Laura has posted on the chat. If you can just go click on that link and provide us with feedback on our presentation today, that will be helpful for us on ways to improve for future presentations. We'll appreciate that. Thank you so much. And the floor is open for anyone that has any questions regarding any of the things that we presented on today. Thank you. So you can turn on your microphone and, ask the question. So the session is recorded. For the question about providing the slides, the session has been recorded and will be posted on the CTL website. So you can access it, I think, at the end of the GATacademy. Is that so, Laura?
Okay, so someone has asked a question. So in the past, I have come across as entitled or privileged. As entitled or privileged students. How would I resolve? Sorry, one second. I'll just need to read through it. Okay, so sometimes you might approach a student who might come off as being entitled or privileged. How do you resolve issues with such a student who isn't really willing to communicate with me, but just wants me to increase their grades? Shanira, did you want to answer that, or would you like me to have a go at it?
I didn't get the question, sorry.
So okay, so sometimes when you TA or you GA, you might come across a student who might come off as being very harsh, sometimes comes off as being entitled or privileged. When they have an issue, they're not really willing to communicate with you. They just want you to increase their grades. How do you deal with that?
I think, like I said earlier, the goal is always to engage the students, because if you do not have that communication, there's no way to actually know what's behind the outbursts, for instance. And like the example I gave, somebody may be having a bad day, and the way to react is to post an angry comment or to be disruptive in class. But you may not know this unless you have that conversation with the person. So if the person is not willing to engage with the TA, in that case, then you have to get the instructor involved, because you cannot address something that you're not aware of. You cannot, resolve the conflict if you don't know what the issue is. Remember, we talked about getting to know what the issue is. So if the student is not going to communicate with you in an effective way, there's just no way that you're going to resolve that issue. So you have to escalate it. In other words, you have to get the instructor involved, and then the instructor can take it from there. So there's nothing really much that you can do as a graduate or a teaching assistant if the student is not willing to engage. Taking the next step comes from engaging with the student. So
Yeah, that's a good point. You can only go so far if somebody doesn't want to communicate you. So you can try your best to communicate, but at the end of the day, if they don't want to communicate, you just send whatever question it is to your instructor, whether that's the email that a student has sent you, or if they're arguing with you in a lab section or in class, just go straight to the instructor, let the instructor know what's going on, and they should be able to take care of the rest from there. So you don't have to carry that burden on your shoulders.
I think another thing from that question has to do with the grade. The students seem to want you to improve her grade. And one of the things I learned in my early teaching days is that even if you give a student 0.25 extra or 0.5, they're very happy.
Do you mean they try to push you to increase their grade?
Yeah, the question, what you said earlier, somebody is in your office and the person is talking and talking and you are trying to explain, and you could see the person's concern is not what you are saying, is that, oh, you gave me 3 out of 7.
Yeah.
I think I want more than 3. My point is that if you read the paper again, you can ask the student, give me time to review your paper once more. and then the student will be obliged and will leave the paper with you. You look at it and see if you can give the student an extra 0.25 or anything extra, not too long, not too large. Or you go and discuss it with the instructor, and both of you can arrive at something.
Yeah, that's true. So if a student is willing to communicate, so you can look over their work. So if they have a question or on a quiz that they've done and they're not too sure that it's been marked fairly, which happens, right? They might come back to you and ask you to look over and give them the marks they need. When I'm stuck in these situations, what I like to do is, I know dealing with students sometimes can be hard. Some students are really easy to work with. Some students keep you motivated, and then there are some students that might just kind of cause a lot of stress. And what I do in these situations is I just take a step back and I remind myself that, you know, I was an undergraduate student before. I'm still a student now. I know that they face a lot of pressure. Maybe some of them want to get into certain programs or career paths and they need certain grades. So a lot of the time when they're expressing anger, if a student is a bit angry, it's not really anger towards you as a person. They just have a lot of they're just so nervous and stressed out about something else. It just ends up being dumped on you. Is that fair? No, but it's good to know where people are coming from. So with that in mind, when I have a student come up to me who's really upset or angry, saying that their exam has not been marked fairly, I usually try to calm them down a bit and say, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to look it over and I'm going to see if they're right. Maybe they're right. Maybe maybe I just didn't read what they said properly. Maybe I misinterpreted the answer. It's hard sometimes to say that you're wrong, but it's important to be fair at the end of the day, right? So I take that quiz or assignment or whatever, and I sit down and I read it over, and if they are correct, I adjust that mark. If not, I can't really give them marks that they don't deserve, right? Because that's not fair to the other students. If I'm not going to add the other students the extra marks, I can't add it to this one case, right? So what I do after that is I return it to the student and say, okay, I looked it over. I wasn't able to change your mark, but what you can do is you are more than welcome to take this test and make an appointment with the professor and talk it over with the professor. And a lot of the times they do end up doing that. So remember, at the end of the day, you're the GA or the TA. You're not the instructor, so you don't have to carry all the burden on your shoulders. You have certain responsibilities, and after that point, it's the professor who decides what to do.
And if I may jump in here, I think the strategies that we provided in today's workshop is just to de-escalate the conflict. For example, when people start showing destructive emotions that might derail the discussion. So the actions that you take, in other words, the calming effect, the finding out what's going on with the student, is just to de-escalate the emotional outburst, after which you can now decide on the better way to resolve the conflict. So resolving the conflict, for instance, in this case where the students are disputing their grades, does not mean that you give in to the students. The actions that you take during the live session is to ensure that the event, the triggering event, in other words, the disruption in the class or the angry outbursts or the yelling on the discussion board in caps, for instance, if they post comments in caps, which means they are really angry. The actions that the strategies we provide today is just to de-escalate that, to ensure that that doesn't derail the discussions happening live in the class. What you're going to do afterwards will depend on what the terms of engagement are. So for instance, for grades, there are rubrics that have been provided for the assessment. So if the student is disputing the grades, is a question of going to the rubrics and finding out what were the expectations for the paper. And if the student did not meet the expectations, then they didn't meet the expectations and they do not deserve additional grades. So that's how to resolve that conflict. So resolving a conflict doesn't mean that you give in to the student's demands all the time. What you can do is responding to their outbursts to stop that from derailing a live session, a live discussion session. So like Miriam said, in some cases, you can't resolve their conflict, you can't add the grades, so you escalate to the instructor. But in some cases where it's a question of someone is upset by a comment someone has made and wants to go back and forth, trying to threaten the discussion, then you can step in and intervene so that the discussion proceeds forward. So that's how you can resolve the conflict.
There is no stellar resolution to a conflict.
There is no
perfect resolution to a conflict. And when you look at a student's paper, not just a quiz, if you write an essay and you submit it and you look at your grading, there's a way you can go back and look at the scores you have made. The student might be telling you that I made my argument properly. This is what I said. And then you go back and read it. Or you may have read 50 scripts or 25 student scripts and look at whether you missed something. And if you think you missed something, you should be humble enough to give the student an extra grade or what the student deserves. If the student does not deserve anything, then you explain to the student why you think you don't deserve a grade.
Absolutely. But that's a resolution to the conflict, So there's a dispute about grades and you use objective criteria to resolve the conflict, which is going back to the rubrics that you provided. And you're right, in some cases, maybe the instructors may have missed something. I mean, I've also disputed grades before as a graduate student, and the professor was kind enough to note that I may be right. And when he did go back to my paper, he found out that he was wrong in the grade that he assigned to me, and he gave me the proper grades. So the important thing is how you respond to the student when the student comes to meet with you. Do you tell the student off and not provide them with the opportunity to make their case? So you have to give them that platform, that opportunity, that chance to say what it is that is irking them, what it is that is, their problem. Provide that platform is what we're saying. And then when that platform is provided, how do you then resolve the issue? Because the issue here is the dispute of the grades, but the way the way the conflict might be framed might be in an angry outburst, right? And so if you dismiss that outburst, you never get to the issue, which is the grade dispute. So that's what we're saying about engaging in the conflict and providing an atmosphere where people can come and air their grievances and say what it is that the issue is. And then you can go ahead and see how you can resolve the dispute. So in the case that you've provided, when you go ahead and look at the student's paper, you can come to the conclusion that you didn't read it well. And so you can, provide additional points. And in this case, the conflict has been resolved. Or you can say, well, I looked at the rubrics, I looked at your paper, and I think the grade you got is fair. In that case, the conflict has been resolved. The student might not be happy with the resolution, and what she can always escalate to the supervisor of the instructor to make her case. So there's no one perfect way of resolving conflict because they all come in different ways. But when you implement those strategies of responding in a constructive way, then you can go ahead and address the issues. Okay, so
yeah, I think that might just be it for today.
So thank you everyone for participating.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you guys found the workshop beneficial and you learned some tips to help you along the way. We're also going to be sending out some resources, so stay tuned to those and make sure you fill out that feedback form so that we can learn, as we talked about earlier today, feedback is important, right? So we can learn what worked for you guys from this workshop and what kind of advice you have for us to make our future workshops even better.
Thanks, everyone.